From Nguyen. I'm a second year in the Asian American Studies master's program. So I'm really happy to be here today, everyone. Good morning. Hopefully everyone's awake. And so what I will be presenting on today is just a very small part of what I'm hoping to finally produce as my thesis, which will be filed in the next 3 months or so. So we'll see where that goes. Anyway, so my presentation is called 0 Feet Away, Technology, Sexuality, and Race. So this is going to be about those dating site applications that y'all have on your smartphones or heard about or talked about. Could be called Tinder, could be called OkCupid. In my communities, they're called Grindr, Jack, lots of things. So moving on. All right, so addressing the paradox of race after the internet, Lisa Nakamura and Peter Chow White write, as the shift from analog to digital media formats and ways of knowing continues apace, continued social pressure is brought to bear on the idea of race as a key aspect of identity and an organizing principle for society. Yet no matter how digital we become, the continuing problem of social inequality along racial lines persists. The digital is altering our understandings of what race is, as well as nurturing new types of inequality along racial lines. Meditating on the politics and paradoxes of race after the internet, I am interested in the discourses, embodiments, and coalitions limited, enabled, and proliferated by the reproduction of race, sexuality, and gender in networking medias. While the literature on race and the internet has been expanded and diversified by scholars such as Lisa Nakamura's work on avatars in the World of Warcraft, to Alondra Nelson's work on genetic testing and YouTube revelation videos, I choose to focus specifically on those enabled by geolocation-based, mobile, gay social networking applications and media, the most prolific of which being Grindr, in order to argue neoliberal discourses of preference and the flexible logics of capitalism work to not only uphold a particularly homo-nationalist embodiment of proper gay male sexuality, but also to recode the conditions of racism for queer men of color from the structural to the individual, wherein the individual is the space which cannot and will not be legislated. Attention to the rhetoric of the individual also uncovers how the subject of the individual, in this case, can only be disciplinarily so, or respectably so, that is, white, middle class, and proper. While I do not seek to minimize the impact of individual experiences of racism, I am interested in a deep pathology of racist interactivity and networking of both structural and individual lives of race and sexuality through the nodes of Grindr across popular discourse, its search for genre, and cultural production. So I'm not particularly looking at, I didn't do like interviews, I'm looking more at the discourse and the public literature of it. So as movements for queer liberation have become increasingly white, homonormative, and neoliberal, the public lives of queers of color have been pushed farther into the margins. Additionally, as the lived experiences of everyday communication become increasingly facilitated through turning technology, it's necessary to interrogate technoscapes as a place which contradictorily reproduces race and racialized power dynamics to the exigencies of postmodernist consumption and belonging. While at the same time these sites reproduce racial power dynamics, which underpin contemporary logics of racism, of capitalism, same thing almost. Dominant culture seeks to erase it. Bringing together the space of technoscapes and queer intimate desires, I am interested in investigating the production of racialized desires of queer intimacies as mediated by and facilitated across the space of technology upon Asian American bodies. Using hookups applications on smartphones as a site in which to investigate racialized desire, I ask, how does race collide with and confront colorblind logics of neoliberal normatism in the space of desire? How are purveyors of these hookup applications motivated by negotiating citizenship through the fetishization of difference? How does technology facilitate the production of desires, both private made public and public made private? Furthermore, how are these racialized gender desires structured by and structure contemporary logics of flexible capitalistic accumulation? How is commodification and consumption imbricated within these markets and markers of racialized desire? So here I draw upon Lauren Berlant's writing on the impasse and ordinariness in order to approach the conundrum of race in what is narrated as the post-racial moment. Berlant writes, the ordinary as a zone of convergence of many histories where people manage the incoherence of lives that proceed in the face of threats to the good life they imagine. Here, the ordinary is discussed in an analysis of the impasse, which is shaped by a crisis in which people find themselves developing skills for adjusting to newly proliferating pressures to scramble for modes for living on. The impasse, as a method to track the present, is a stretch of time in which one moves around with a sense that the word is at once present, intensely present, and enigmatic, such that the activity of living demands both a wandering, absorptive awareness and a hypervigilance that collects material that might help to clarify things. Turning our attention to this following slide, I've collected in a short time multiple articles addressing race and online apps which have proliferated on popular online gay and mainstream news sites such as Huffington Post, The Sword, and Online Campaign, and Racism and Homophobia as a collection of impasses. The collection of headlines reads, I'm sure you can see yourselves, no Asian, no Indian, picky dater, or racist dater. Discriminating against race on Grindr does not make you a racist. Open letter to Grindr users. I am not rice, he is not curry. And Grindr founder Joel Shimkai says, no Asian is okay. Without going too in-depth in the content of the article themselves, as that will take much more than 10 minutes can afford, these titles suggest a type of management of incoherence encompassed in the specters of race, technology, sexuality, and the nation itself, which continually reemerge in the everyday usage of what is marketed as an innocuous way to connect to local men in one's immediate geography. If the ordinary is a zone of convergence of many histories that proceed as moments to manage the incoherence that threatens the good life imagined, these articles point to a shared sense of historical and contemporary racism that threatens to disrupt the project of nationalist belonging to a state defined over and against the bodies of racialized communities of color. These moments of impasse struggle to find the genre of racist action that seems to emerge incoherently in the present moment. To what genre does the question of racism even belong right now? Was not the specter of racism overcome in our post-civil rights America, according to these articles? Arguments over the discourse of preference emerge as a particularly apt mode of charting crisis of nationalist projects of belonging and logics of market choice and late capitalism. In the strand of articles, which I term as the naysayer type of articles, the racist mantra of no Asians, no blacks, etc., are explained away as not racist, but rather exist in the realm of individualized personal preference. As queer men of color have historically been narrated as sources of contagion or excess, or as Stephanie pointed out earlier, surplus subjects, the narration of personal preference as working against unearned forms of sexual affirmative action elides the history that queer men of color have faced in the US, having been discursively bound as contagion, excess, aberration, invader, and or foreigner. As these moments shift the focus of racism from the structural to the individual, they simultaneously get narrated as interiorities, desires, which refuse to be managed even while they're conditioned by desires to be normative. I turn to this next slide in order to discuss the disciplining of the proper individual or subject of gay male desires. What I've collected here are screenshots of profiles that detail a particular profile's preference, in which in part represents the various moments of impasse expressed in the previous slide. As a participant in my own research, I myself am no stranger to being bombarded with these moments of mask, musk, white only assemblages. I set this in contrast with a quotation from Justin, the screenshot of the Asian dude up there, a character from a YouTube documentary series based in Australia called The Grindr Guide, which features 5 to 10 minute shorts about a cast of characters looking for love on Grindr. His quotation on the episode entitled Race embodies the primary theme of my particular interest on normative and disciplinary embodiment. He says, "It's not like you can just go to the gym and work off the Asian." Here, Justin expresses the impossibility of national or utopic incorporation which has been promised to him in the space of Grindr, where race and gender difference cannot physically matter. However, his skin always follows him where he cannot just work off the Asian, suggesting that normative embodiments of race and gender digitally come come to matter. Contrasting this to the rhetoric of Grindr's connectivity allows us to investigate the operations of homonormativity. Drawing upon Lisa Duggan's work, she writes that homonormativity is politics that does not contest dominant heteronormative assumptions and institutions, but upholds and sustains them while promising the possibility of a demobilized gay constituency and a privatized, depoliticized gay culture anchored in domesticity and consumption. If Grindr recenters debate of racism in the gay community from a matter of structural concerns to that of irreconcilable and individualized quote-unquote preference, then it quite clearly expresses the operations of homonormativity, wherein consumption, domesticity, and demobilization masks more pernicious structural matters. I turn to my final slide in order to address the potential of alternative forms of connectivity that may be enabled in the rhetoric of Grindr's connectivity. On this slide are screenshots of Grindr's mission statement. I want to turn particular attention to the sense of immediacy and locality that Grindr privileges, where connections can and should occur for gay men within a 500 feet radius at any place at any time. As you can see up there, there's a line that says, oh, trying to get you from 500 feet away to 0 feet away to in person or something like that. It's a tourist's dream, a traveling marketplace of bodies. This is juxtaposed over an image of the so-called dubbed iPhone girl, a photo that appeared on an iPhone of a Western consumer in the UK. The iPhone girl is presumed to be a factory worker where the phone was constructed and later shipped, a physical digital image of a kind of connectivity enabled by capitalism, which should have been concealed, unacknowledged, and private. As queer men of color are denied connectivity to an illusion of normative ways of life, as they remain squarely in the debate of racism, which struggles to be recognized, we must think of other forms of connectivity which are both enabled, but must remain concealed for fears of disrupting the illusion of the ordinary, of life after the internet, of the end of capitalism. Like the image of the iPhone girl appearing where it ought not, we must turn to lateral connectivities that extend beyond the 500 feet of Grindr's geolocational positionings. What would it look like then to seek connection between racialized queers of colors and factory workers who made these phones, or other forms of connectivity yet to be imagined?